So we're going to check the steering head bearings and lube them today. The way you check them is you grab the axle and you pull it this way. Of course you have to have it up off the ground. And if you feel any play, then your steering head bearings are loose. So these steering head bearings are fine. We just thought we'd show that before we grease the bearings. And the other test is to feel for a notch. With the front wheel off the ground, you move it just left and right of center. And if you feel any kind of notch, your steering head bearings are shot and need to be replaced. Alright, for a GS, you need to take the faux tank plastic off, and then you take the screws out from the little switch pod, and then let's see, there's a 13mm wrench for these, and you're going to need a 12mm Allen for the center nut. I believe it's a 30mm for the big nut, and a 6mm for the pinch bolts. So the first thing we're going to do is take the handlebars off, and then we'll take the top clamp off. Once the clamp bolts are removed, the clamps come off, and sometimes they're a little hard to come off, so just smack it with a mallet a little bit. And then the handlebars themselves, sometimes you just have to smack them. Okay, and we're going to set them out of the way. The easiest way to get the handlebars out of the way is to take a bungee cord of the proper size and just hook them where the crossbar goes and run the bungee around the front, and now they're up out of the way. This nut's 30mm, and this is the clamp nut, so we need to set the handlebars all the way and then knock this thing loose. With the pinch bolts loose and this nut off, the top clamp comes right off. Now the switch is still there, so there's some wires that have to be watched after. All right, there's a couple of little clamps here that wires go in, and once you pop the wires out of there, this thing will set off over to the side out of your way. With a 12mm Allen, by the way, you can get this for $7.99 at AutoZone along with 2 other wrenches. This is what's required to get this loose. Well, you can tighten it with that. This thing comes off with either a pin wrench, or sometimes you can get it loose with your hands. So as we take this off, the fork is lowering down, which is why there's some tension on this. When this comes out, the fork's going to fall to the ground. We put a piece of wood under the front wheel, and that makes it easier to get this thing loose. And yeah, it's not quite out yet. Here it comes. Okay, so there's the top bearing, and this one's easy to grease. It's just take it over the bench and rub some grease in it. The one on the bottom's a little more difficult. All right, so we're taking grease and just rubbing it in the bearing and turning the bearing to try to get the rollers to turn a little bit, and stuff a lot of grease in there. And that's pretty much all there is to packing a bearing.
And high temperature grease?
Oh, yeah, and it's high temperature grease. In this case, we're using Mobil 1 synthetic grease. You want to be sure to use high temperature grease on the F650. So you can see the lower bearing is accessible underneath, and again, you just take a lot of grease and pack it in there and spin the bearing around, and once you have a whole lot of fresh grease on it, you're done. Okay, the front of the bike is held up on some scraps of wood, and we put one under the front wheel so that the front end didn't drop out completely. Now we need to set the forks back up in there. So one way is to raise the forks, the other way is to tilt the bike back forward. So the easiest thing to do is pull one of the blocks out. All right, now you can see that this is not exactly lined up, so we can just roll the wheel back a little bit, and that'll center it up, and we can screw this back on. By rocking the front wheel, I can get the steering head the steering stem to come up in the head, which makes it easier to screw the nut on to tighten the top bearing. Now we've got the bike is blocked up again under the engine so that the front wheel is off the ground, and we need to tighten the top nut until there is some drag on the forks, and this is where it's a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and a little bit of feel. You want to, with any tapered roller bearing, you want to over tighten it and then back it off a little bit. So we're using channel locks to tighten this up, and we want to get it pretty tight so that when you move it back and forth, there's some drag to it. That's thunder. You want to have it over tight, so we need to tighten it up so that there's drag to it, and then we're going to back it off a little bit. Uh-oh. Jinx, hush. Alright, so we felt it, and it felt tight enough, so now we're going to back it off just about that much. Now we've screwed the nut back in, and then we're going to snug it up just till it's snug. Don't really want to put torque on this. We don't want to move the other bearing. Now it's time to put the top clamp back on. Okay, and with the top clamp on, then we put this nut back on. And we're gonna torque that nut pretty good. I think it's 45 Newton meters. Since we haven't removed the fork tubes, they end up at the same place they were when it came apart, and now it's time to tighten up the pinch bolts. And now we need to put the handlebars back, so we'll take our bungee loose and put the handlebars someplace where it might be right, and put the top clamp in and put the bolts in real loose, and then we'll adjust the handlebars till they look like they're in the right place. So once we get both the clamps in and get all the bolts in, we torque it till it's good and snug, and then it's time to put the switch assembly back on. Okay, don't forget to put the clutch cable and the throttle cable back in the little plastic deals that hold them in place. With the whole thing back in place, you want to be able to knock the handlebar and have it move, and that shows that it's not overly tight. But it shouldn't just fall on its own. You need to knock it. The cables kind of make this a little difficult, and so that's what we're seeing here is mostly cable stiction. But it feels good. For anyone interested, this is the Touratech maintenance-free battery system. The battery's a little shorter, and for a little extra money you get this bracket with these standoffs and this plastic piece that moves the contacts over, and I have it on good authority that this is a good deal. If you have a wet battery instead of a permanent battery and you drop your bike, for instance if you take it off-road, if the acid spills it can eat the finish on your motor, and I think that's the reason that RTM got the maintenance-free battery. The battery acid also ate the harness, and it had to be rewrapped and rerouted. In this section, we are going to drop the motor out of a classic Funduro F650. First thing we're going to do is take off the belly pan, and that makes it a little easier to change the oil, to drain the oil. There's 4 screws, 2 on the bottom and 2 in the front, and once we get these 4 screws out, the belly pan just drops off. The sump bolt is a 17mm bolt. There's not much oil in the sump, but you got to drain it. The side panel is held with 5 screws. There's 4 that are easy to see, and then there's one up under the front near the radiator, near the piece that goes across the radiator. So we're going to take the side covers off. All right, now I'm going to take the drain bolt out of the frame. Hopefully I won't make too big a mess. Now I'm going to take a lot of the body work off, just to make the bike more accessible. Once you take the seat off, there's 2 screws that hold the side cover. One of them is under the seat, and then the other one's down here. And then there's a rubber grommet thing that just pops out. And if you have some kind of luggage rack, you got to kind of bend the panel a little bit to get it around there. The windshield is held on with 4 bolts that go into rubber well nuts. So first we take the bolts out. Okay. With the well nuts out, the windscreen just pops off with the bolts out of the well nuts. And then the dash panel comes out. Sometimes the well nuts stay in the dash panel, sometimes they stay in the fairing. You don't want to lose those. Okay, to take the gas tank off, we're going to take, with the lowers already off, we're going to take these 4 bolts out on each side, and then there's 1 bolt in the back. Okay. With the fairing disconnected from the tank, or tank from the fairing, we take the bolt out of the back. If you grind this to a dull tip, you can use it for the crank stop bolt for when you do valves. And we take the fuel line off, and then the gas tank just lifts off. Okay, now it's time to drain the coolant. So you want to get your drain pan under there, and then you loosen the bottom bolt that holds the water pump, and open the radiator. While the radiator's draining, we'll take the fairing off. There's 4 bolts that you can see. You only need to remove the 2 on the sides. The 2 in the front hold the headlight. So when we get these 2 bolts out, the fairing's going to fall off. So it's nice to either catch it or put a towel on top of the fender to protect it. Once these bolts are off, the only thing holding the fairing on will be the turn signal connectors, and they just pull loose. So here we go. Then you take the headlight loose and the parking light, and away we go. Now we're going to take the battery out. It's not 100% necessary. It should absolutely be disconnected, but it's always a good idea just to get it out and away from the bike when you're doing a lot of work on it, because you never know when you're going to drop a wrench. So there's 1 screw that holds the battery retainer, and then you always want to pull the ground first, and then pull the hot. I like to put the battery bolts back in the battery, that way they won't get lost and the nuts won't get lost. And the battery itself pulls out, but you got to take the overflow tube loose, and then we can put the battery aside. Since the radiator's drained, I'm going to go ahead and remove the radiator hose from the engine. These are not the stock clips. The stock clips you just got to pop loose with a screwdriver. They're supposed to be single-use clips, but you can put them back together if you're clever. I prefer these kind. This is a stock factory clip, and these are how you stick a screwdriver in and just sort of twist it, and they pop loose. In order to put them back together, you can take a pair of channel locks and get a short, flat screwdriver bit for a hex drive, and you can put the jaw of the channel lock here and put the screwdriver tip in there and squeeze them back together. Then we're going to take the radiator overflow hose loose, which is just one of those hair hair clips. All right, and we're going to take a tie wrap loose so that we can get the fan unplugged. And there's a little tab you have to push to release the fan. And now the only thing holding the radiator is 2 bolts. To get the radiator bolts out, you need a 10 millimeter and an 8 millimeter.
And 6 millimeter.
Sorry, 10 millimeter and a 6 millimeter. All right, with the 2 top bolts out, the radiator itself just lifts up out of the rubber grommets and comes out of the bike. Okay, we're going to take the countershaft sprocket cover off, which is 3 bolts. One of them's a little tricky to get to, so we'll do that one last. To get to the last one, what we're going to do is depress the brake pedal so we can get the wrench in there. I'll just use my knee. Okay, and cover comes off. All right, now we're going to take the oil filter out. This is always messy, so I stuffed the rag in there. On the Classic, there's only 2 bolts, unlike the later models that have 3. So we take the 2 bolts out. And there goes the oil. And to get the oil filter out, I've created a special tool out of a coat hanger, and it just pulls the filter out. Once the filter's out, you can turn it and let it drain. Take your rag and wipe the oil cavity. It's always a mess. While we're here, we'll just go ahead and disconnect some of the electrics. Take spark plug leads off. Got spark plug leads. This is the sensor for the temperature light or temperature gauge, and this is the sensor for the fan. So now this side of the motor is pretty clear. I'm going to go ahead and get this hose off the top cover while I'm here. Alright, and then we have to do the exhaust system. So alright, you need a 13 millimeter combination wrench in order to get the nuts from the other side. I've already loosened those up, and now I'm working on this side.
Okay.
Then we have to remove the fitting for the pollution control, and that takes a 19 millimeter wrench. The U pipe just jumped out when I was working on that nut, and once we get this loose, the header pipe will come out of the head. Okay, so here's the header pipe, and here's the U pipe. Now, there's gaskets that go in the head there, and there's a gasket in there, and then there's a gasket in the muffler bend. It's not the muffler itself, but now we've got the exhaust loose. All right, the 19 millimeter wrench fits the fitting at the other end of the pollution pipe. This is an air injector, so that fresh air is injected into the exhaust system with every pulse of the motor. And with that out, we can take this screw out, and then the pipe itself will come out. Now we're going to remove the countershaft nut. We're not going to take the sprocket off loose because you may need it to do something on the other side of the motor. So first we have to straighten the locking tab back, and then once the locking tab's straight out of the way, take our 30mm wrench and pop it loose. Next we're going to take this little connector cover off here. This is just kind of a trim panel, and when this guy's off, what we will have access to is the wire that goes down to the neutral. Okay, and we can pull the oil pressure sensor connector loose, and then we'll have to take this side cover off in order to get the connectors out for the alternator and for the, no, actually we can unplug those at the other. Now we're going to take the carburetors out. Since I've already got this stuff apart, I'm going to go ahead and loosen this clamp over here that holds the carburetor to the rubber manifold, and I'm going to put the clamp back on the rubber manifold so that it doesn't get lost. Then I'm going to go around the other side and do several things. I'll loosen the same clamp on this side. And with this clamp loose, tighten it back up so that I don't lose it. And then I'm going to take the clamps from the air box loose, and I'm going to remove the rear motor mount. Might as well do that first. Okay, so I'm going to take this bracket out. This is the bracket where the tank mounts. And with this bracket out, I'm going to put the bolts back in because we're going to hang the motor from the top mount when we go to take it out. So we want to have these bolts in here, but not tight. And then loosen these screws here that hold the clamps for the air box. Okay, now carburetors are pretty much loose, so we just have to wrestle them out of place, push them forward, get them up out of the back, pull them back, get them up out of the front. This is a little tricky sometimes, and I find a tire iron is a good thing to use for this. I'm going to spray some Ruglide on the rubber boot and take a tire iron and pry the rubber boot loose. The reason I use a tire iron is because it's not sharp like a screwdriver. Okay, so there's one boot out. Spray a little Ruglide on the other guy. Wait. Okay. Wrestle the carb. Okay, and they just come right out the top. Alright, now I've done the modification where I removed the canister. So I've got the plugged hose, and then there's one other line here. Take loose. This is the one that goes to the fresh air injector. Now the carbs are out to the point where I can remove, I believe it's a 14mm wrench, the choke assembly.